Āria mai, ora mai. Āria mai, ora mai. E te anau, tāpata ia tō koto maro itiki. Ia ruru, ia piri, e ai kārea.
During the economic crisis, we saw families lose jobs, income disappear almost overnight, and many Cook Islanders were forced to leave and find work overseas. As the chief of staff, during that time, what was it like seeing families go through that? And what do you think were the hardest challenges during that time?
Well, I mean, different people, depends how it affects you, but of course, the most notable would be in terms of people losing their jobs and making the decisions to leave Rarotonga to, and the Cook Islands, because the reduction of workers was not just here, because we had to reduce the number of government jobs in the outer islands. It wasn't an easy exercise by any stretch, and it affected a lot of people. Those who were doing the job of trying to restructure things so that we can survive and hopefully come out the other end stronger. I think basically for everyone, it's just knowing that people were making decisions to leave the Cook Islands. I mean, for us in government, I think for our Prime Minister at the time, one, it's a mission of failure all around, and it's not easy to think of our people leaving. They're leaving, they're voting with their feet to leave the country. But really, you have to look at it that we were in deep trouble. Because it was an interesting time too for those who were involved, the whole country, because I remember the first meeting that Lloyd Powell, who we recruited really to undertake the structural changes in government. He was a change manager, and we were fortunate to find him and have him hit the whole process, because the first meeting he called a meeting at the Rarotonga Beach Resort, where he gathered everybody, government and all the private sector. And his presentation was interesting. It was very simple. There was no fancy presentation, no overhead projector, no nothing. It was just a blackboard. And he grabbed the chalk and he drew a cookie jar. He called this is the cookie jar. And he said, that's the Cook Island. And he asked everybody, what's wrong with this cookie jar? And somebody said, well, there's no cookie in it. And he said, that's exactly it. This is the Cook Island. Whatever we do, we have to admit there is no more cookies in the cookie jar.
Wow.
That's our job, to find ways of getting some cookies in there. And there's no easy way around it. And I think that really set the scene for people to say, all right, the reality is right there for us, and we have to do something about it. And interestingly, luckily, Lloyd Powell wasn't a theorist. He doesn't look at models and so on. He was a practical applicator of whatever needs done at that time, the problem. So we had no model to follow. And he challenged us Cook Islanders to face up and try and figure out what we had to do. Because one of the most interesting things, right after that meeting actually selected 2 people to drive the downsizing. And guess who the 2 people who was tasked with that?
You?
No. The Public Service Commissioner and the President of the State Services Association. Public Service Association.
Public Service.
Jules Vaiman it was. And what's the name of Tuingariki's wife? She was the Public Service Commissioner. Those two actually drove the downsizing.
Wow.
You know, nobody outside.
Yeah.
And can you imagine? He was cutting his own members. But the reality set into everybody.
Yeah.
And we set about to, carrying out the task. Of course, the pain was quite, dramatic.
Yeah.
And the pain started right from the top. When I look at Sir Jeff, I admire him from the fact that he had to admit that his thoughts and even his theory of economics for the Cook Island, he had to throw it out the window and change. Because I remember before then, things were quite buoyant in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I've heard him expounded his theory that government has to spend money to keep the economy moving. He did that. And he had to reverse his position.
Yeah.
Because that didn't work. And he had to lead the charge in making so many difficult decisions.
Yeah.
And when I look at his life thereafter, I don't think the people appreciated how much it took out of him. Because one of the first department or entity to downsize was actually the Prime Minister's office.
Oh, wow.
Initially, the challenges were when we were reducing the size of those entities I was talking of, bringing them into MFEM, is deciding who will be taking over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we decided all the older ones has to retire and paid off, and it was the younger ones to take over.
Okay.
And that was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sending people home, and at the same time, government set up a training center. Yeah, we were lucky. ADB provided the funds to help with the reform, and also the training and all that. The ADB set up a loan to help out.
Oh.
There were 2 tranches they did.
Yeah.
And New Zealand didn't really come to the party. New Zealand only helped out with consultants and all that. Yeah, because they wanted to. Can I use the word? Teach us a lesson.
Yes, of course.
Learn from your mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically the attitude they have taken.
Yeah.
And in terms of the recovery, to be honest, the first 2 years we were all struggling. And then people can then see, as you know, there's a lot of entities owned by government in the private sector, which is the Rarotongan, the Vodafone, what's the telecom at the time. So government has to let go of all that. Yeah. So part of the economic reform is to try and develop and promote the private sector. So in areas where the government is in, where government shouldn't be in, should be private sector, government let those entities away. Yeah.
During the crisis, there were a lot of public servants laid off, and they all went overseas. It was very sad to see that. And I still feel, because most of my staff was, they left and went overseas to look for greener pastures. And for us, we were left behind. There's a lot of us who stayed behind too, but more have traveled overseas to Australia and New Zealand. Very sad that time to see people leave, and the island seems to be empty. And but for for me and some of the people that stayed behind, we continued to bring the island to, how do you say it? Te inua kirunga ne. E te oraanga kia maru i te katoto, ki ora te katoto. Mato ke kare e moni te ria tu atau. But people were planting and having their own home gardens to support their family. The ones that didn't have the funding to pay their airfares to go overseas. There were a lot of people who stayed behind, and I was one of them. And that's when I took over working for myself and our little business.
Yeah. So during that time, so you saw more people were starting to plant, or were they already planting around that time? Te o tangata tamtanu mga ere.
They were planting that time.
Yeah.
Because we used to export bananas during those years in the 90s, 80s and 90s. And then the crisis came, karere exportable. And also because of the bananas were stopped because of the white fly. And quarantine in New Zealand were very strict. And so we lost that income.
Yeah.
So we weren't sending produce to New Zealand because of the strict quarantine regulations.
If we go back to the reform, when government did the big cut in 96, 97, I was the mayor of the island then, and I became the mayor in 1995. That was the first mayoral election. I won the Atataki mayoralty. And the expectation was to get the place going, get the community involved in doing their own thing, business, tourism, and things like that. And I must admit that we were green, we didn't know what to expect, but the drive, we were quite driven to get what we want to do. At the time that we were quite dependent on the Ministry of Infrastructure or government, the public works at the time, to provide the services. The council had nothing. All what we had was our remunerations. And we didn't have any power at all to employ people to work. So we had this relationship with the Ministry of Public Works. I think at the time I was quite fortunate because Papa Ron Maki, he was in charge of Public Works, and him and I had a very close relationship at the time, even today. And we would sit down and talk about how can we develop the place and things like that. But again, it falls back to all money, eh? If you haven't got the money to develop, then you can't. We did what we could at the time with the very limited machineries he had and the limited funding he had, but we actually managed a bit. And then came the reform. We didn't know what to do. It was quite a stun that people had to lose their jobs, and the council just don't know what to do. But there was one good thing we did. We turned to our trochus resource, to our marine resources. At the time, where trochus shell was a major export of the island, and it was bringing good money to the people of the island. But you don't do it all the time. You do it once a year, and that's according to the marine resources checks. They say, yeah, we can harvest that, and we do. We actually managed it quite well, and that was something that the people were depending on for their Christmas money at the time, and we had that for 5 years. We brought in about
over the 5 year, about just over $1 million.
Wow.
And that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And from there, the council took a small percentage of the revenue, and we managed to score some second-hand machines and help out with the infrastructure development.
Yeah.
But that was a good source of revenue for the people. So it's like that. At the end of the year, they would wait. When are we going to harvest? And we give the shares out, and people receive their money just before Christmas.
Yeah.
A week or a couple of days before Christmas.
Oh, nice.
It was the thing of the day where the bank would fly from Rara.
Oh,
But
wow.
with, bags, suitcases of money.
Wow.
People will be down here with their A's. And waiting to get paid. So that was their Christmas money. But at the time, it was mostly the casual workers' day, and they were highly employed in the agriculture field. Yeah. The Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Infrastructure. And it was sad. Because I can remember one time I was called in. We organized a meeting of all workers. Yeah. And we had some people from Raro, I can't remember who they were, but the address was, the meeting was to tell them that this is what's going to happen. That people will be losing their jobs, and some thought it was a joke. Yeah. Some are saying, no, this is my government. They will not do that to us. This is my party, my government. And, but they did. Yeah. How they laid people off, who were to be laid off, I don't know. The council had nothing to do with it. It was an internal matter with the Ministry of Works or the Ministry of Agriculture. Yeah. It was sad though, because there were some people with loans. Yeah. Small maybe, but they couldn't pay them off. And they were depending on their folks from overseas, from New Zealand, to help out with those kind of services. But how did they go about it? I wouldn't have a clue.
You may have heard of ADB came in to manage the transition, reduction, cut downs. Yeah. So they brought a guy called Lloyd Powell. I think he was South African. I mean, he had a job to do. It was brutal. Yeah. It was brutal. A lot of people, lost their jobs. But for agencies, you had to face him and his team to justify why your ministry should continue, or agency, why your staff should not be sent home. That was a really eye-opener for me. It was done at the Rarotongan, up in the top room. All the agency heads had to stand before the judges to plead your case to whether your ministry continue to exist or close down and your staff sent home. Wow. Or merge with somebody else, another ministry. And what I saw that the week I was in there just observing, some heads of ministries broke down and cried in public. Like, well, you're given 1 month or 2 months, face ministry out. Go and prepare your staff. And how do you prepare your staff for something like that? Yeah. You only got 1 month or 2 months, and it's goodbye. Yeah, it was hard to watch. I saw some guys who I thought were tough guys in public service. I just broke down. So I had to figure out, we had to figure out the ministry, what to do with this. Our head of ministry at that time was Kamen Temata. I was in the ministry, but she asked me to to front our ministry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Maybe I was one of the cheeky ones or something. Which I was, I think. But it was brutal, Nobody wants to go through that. And I never want to go through that process again. Not only for yourself, but your staff waiting at work.
Yeah.
Come back and announce, sorry, we lost our jobs. And you're talking about hundreds of. But watching this process, to me, I realized they've already made up their mind. They already made up their mind. You're already 75% out the door. You had to claw back.
Yeah.
I saw heads of ministries or secretaries, as we were called in those days, come with their folders, their business plans, their budget proposals, their acts, their policies. Well, our act says we've got to do this, government has to do this, trying to justify their existence, how important their jobs were. And most of the time, it wasn't even relevant, didn't even work.
And so it's thank goodness they kept on the Ministry of Culture.
Well, we were one of the ministries that was already earmarked.
Yeah.
You know, arts and music is one of the first things to go when there's no money.
Wow.
You stop buying entertainment, you stop going out, you focus on food and shelter and clothing. And your discretionary spending on entertainment, that's the first thing you cut. So Ministry of Culture was along those lines.
Yeah.
The ministry, well, when you're talking about finance, in their calculations, you can do without the songs and the dancing and all of that. But for us, we knew how important it was.
Yeah.
So I stood up and Mrs. Timothy for culture. I stood up and said, oh, you're not Mrs. Timothy? I said, no. Sonny Williams, speaking for culture. Well, you got 5 minutes. 5 minutes to plead your case. And there's no way you're going to go through your business plan, your act, to protect your ministry and the jobs of your fellow workers. There's no way you can do it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I used the ethnic card. I said to him, well, I'm standing here asking, who are you to come to our country? He looks at me, big, solid, partly bald, glasses, no nonsense. What do you mean? Who are you to come into my country to shut my culture down?
Yeah.
And he knew exactly what I was trying to. He said, no, get it right. I'm not shutting your culture down.
Yeah.
It's the ministry, it's the finances spent on the ministry, blah, blah. I said, no, you shut our Ministry of Culture down. You're shutting our culture down, our language, our dance, our stories, and our gig. He said, no, you stop that. I know what you're playing. I said, so I'm wondering why you, somebody like foreigner, come here and shut my culture down? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
And man, he reacted to that. I think he knew what I was trying to get at. Yeah. And he started getting a bit agitated, but there was a guy sitting next to him, whispered in his ear, and he reluctantly stood up. They went to the back. I waited 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Sheesh, what's happening? They come out and sat down, looks at me, and he says, now, Mr. Williams, I want to correct you and to state that I'm not against your culture. I don't want to shut your culture down. It's not what I'm here about. I'm just looking at mechanism of government, it's finance, size, manpower, that's all. And the last thing I want to do is come and shut your culture down. And then he looked and he says, well, go back and tell your workers they have to try harder. But your ministry is still going to be stripped down a little bit, downsized. Now, okay, you can go next. Walk down.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Yeah, so I came back, all the staff were waiting, and I looked sad, and oh man, everybody looked sad. And I said, we have to try harder.
But there'll be some countdown, man. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was brutal, eh? So I don't know how many ministries were done away with. But yeah, you don't want to go through that again.
Yeah.
Tuki tuki teni teni tarai ara ko tō mate kino mō. Te kere ti te rutuki mate kaka ari ki te matai o. Ua pōkia i te kārere. Pōpongi ori ori e taiti moketa. Te taiti moketa. E rei rātu e tūtaka ia tō ke o.